Hey, look at me. Everything is going to be all right.
I'm just so tired of pretending that it is.
He didn't trap her with force, threats, or fear. He trapped her with something far more dangerous: fragility. A carefully constructed weakness that made her feel needed, chosen, irreplaceable. It began on an ordinary evening, the kind that never warns you it will ruin your life. The cafe was quiet, rain sliding down the glass like time slowing itself to listen. He sat across from her, fingers trembling just enough to seem involuntary, eyes lowered as if holding back something sacred and terrible. When he finally spoke, his voice broke at the exact moment it should have. "Cancer," he said. "Late stage. No guarantees. No certainty. Just borrowed time." He didn't cry loudly. He didn't beg. He let silence do the work. And in that silence, she stepped closer, not physically, but emotionally, into a role she never realized she was being trained to play. She had always believed love was proven through endurance. Through staying when it was inconvenient. Through sacrifice that hurt but felt meaningful. So when he told her he didn't want pity, only honesty, she believed him. When he said he didn't expect her to stay, she stayed harder. She convinced herself that walking away would make her cruel, heartless, unworthy of calling herself loving. He learned her psychology quickly. He noticed how her eyes softened when he looked tired, how guilt bloomed instantly when she questioned inconsistencies. He discovered that all he had to do was look weak at the right time and she would give up pieces of her life without being asked. The lie didn't need to be perfect, it only needed to be emotional. Soon, hospitals became their shared language. Corridors washed in white, the smell of antiseptic clinging to her clothes long after they left. He mastered the art of almost doctors, appointments postponed, tests delayed, vague explanations wrapped in medical jargon. He blamed the system, the waiting lists, the complexity of his condition. She believed him because believing was easier than imagining someone would lie about dying. She took notes during appointments he never attended. She memorized medication schedules that were never real. She watched his chest at night to make sure it rose and fell, terrified that sleep might steal him away. Every cough felt like a countdown. Every smile felt borrowed. And every moment she gave him tightened the invisible rope around her own future. Her world began to shrink quietly. She declined job opportunities that required travel. She stopped meeting friends who questioned his story, telling herself they didn't understand real love. She stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating properly, stopped imagining a life that didn't include his supposed final days. He never demanded these sacrifices outright. He simply allowed them. That was his cruelty, passive, polite, devastating. When she looked exhausted, he apologized just enough to seem human, then leaned into her again. When she hesitated, he reminded her time was short. When doubt surfaced, he collapsed emotionally, accusing her, softly, of abandoning him when he needed her most. And every time, she apologized. Every time, she chose him over herself. He learned how to perform illness the way actors learn their lines. Pale clothes. Controlled movements. Strategic vulnerability. He knew exactly when to appear strong so she would admire him, and when to appear fragile so she would cling harder. Behind closed doors, when she wasn't watching, his body was fine. Healthy. Alive. His laughter was loud, careless. His nights were full of energy he claimed he didn't have. His phone buzzed with messages from friends who joked about his Oscar-worthy performance. Sometimes, he read those messages with her asleep beside him, her hand wrapped around his wrist as if anchoring him to life. He never felt guilt, only amusement. To him, love was leverage. Illness was a leash. And she was walking herself deeper into captivity, convinced she was choosing devotion. What hurt most was not the lie itself, but how beautifully it was designed for her. He didn't fake cancer to escape responsibility or gain money. He did it to own her time, her loyalty, her silence. He wanted someone who would never leave, never demand more, never question power. And she, with her belief that love meant staying no matter what, was the perfect victim. He proposed not with joy or celebration, but with urgency. "Before it's too late," he said, voice cracking on cue. She said yes through tears, believing she was choosing a tragic, meaningful love story instead of realizing she was signing away her future to a man who was not dying, only feeding. There were moments, small and sharp, when the truth brushed against her mind. How could someone so sick recover so quickly after nights she spent crying? Why did doctors never speak directly to her? Why were there no visible treatments, no undeniable evidence? Each time those thoughts appeared, guilt crushed them. She told herself questioning him was cruel. She told herself love required faith, not proof. He encouraged that belief gently, praising her for trusting him, for being different from selfish people who would leave. He built her identity around her endurance, making escape feel like betrayal, not of him, but of who she thought she was. By the time she realized she was tired, bone-deep tired, it was too late to separate herself from the role she had become. She was no longer just his partner. She was his caretaker, his defender, his emotional shield against the world. He took and took, never once asking if she could carry the weight. And when her body finally began to fail under the pressure, when exhaustion hollowed her, when stress carved cracks through her health, he noticed only as much as it inconvenienced him. Her pain didn't fit the script. Her collapse wasn't part of the performance. The lie had already done its work. She loved a man who was never sick. She sacrificed her life for a future that was never real. And the tragedy she believed she was surviving was only just beginning. Love does not usually announce when it stops being love. It fades into obligation, into routine, into fear disguised as devotion. By the time she realized how heavy her days had become, she could no longer remember when her own life had last been light. Her mornings began with checking his temperature, her nights ended with calculating how much sleep he might need. She moved through the world as if it belonged to him, her time, her energy, her future all revolving around the fragile story of his illness. She told herself this was what commitment looked like. That real love wasn't dramatic or exciting, it was quiet suffering endured without complaint. And he encouraged that belief every single day. He praised her patience publicly, calling her strong and selfless in front of others, painting himself as the luckiest man alive. People admired her devotion. They told her she was rare. They told her he was blessed to have someone who wouldn't abandon him at the worst moment of his life. Those words trapped her more tightly than any lock. How could she leave when everyone believed she was the reason he survived? How could she admit doubt without becoming the villain in everyone's story? He understood the power of reputation. He let the world build a pedestal for her, knowing it would make stepping down feel like a fall from grace. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere was different. Not cruel, never openly cruel, but suffocating. His needs came first, always framed as unavoidable. If she wanted to go out, he suddenly felt unwell. If she planned something for herself, he reminded her how unpredictable his condition was. He never said, "Don't leave." He simply made leaving feel dangerous, irresponsible, unforgivable. When she hesitated, he looked at her with wounded eyes and whispered that he didn't want to die alone. That sentence became a weapon. She carried it with her everywhere, a quiet threat that any step away from him might be the one that killed him. Her dreams began to erode slowly. A promotion she had worked toward for years slipped away because she couldn't commit to travel. Friendships thinned, then disappeared, strained by constant cancellations and excuses. When people stopped inviting her, she told herself it was temporary. When her phone grew quiet, she blamed herself for not trying harder. What she didn't see was how effectively he had isolated her, not by force, but by emotional necessity. He had turned her into his entire support system, knowing that the more alone she became, the harder it would be to question him. Sometimes, late at night, when he slept peacefully beside her, she studied his face in the dim light. He looked healthy. Too healthy. His breathing was steady, his skin warm, his body relaxed in a way that didn't match the terminal illness he described. The thought frightened her. Not because it suggested deception, but because it threatened the meaning she had built her suffering on. If he wasn't dying, then what had she been sacrificing everything for? The question terrified her enough that she pushed it away. She chose the comfort of the lie over the chaos of doubt. He proposed on a night heavy with emotion. There was no ring box opened with excitement, no shared laughter, no plans made with joy. Instead, there was urgency. He spoke about time running out, about wanting to belong to someone before the end. His voice trembled just enough. She cried before he finished asking. She said yes because refusing felt like condemning him to die unloved. She said yes because she believed love meant choosing someone even when it hurt. He held her while she cried, hiding the smile she couldn't see. The engagement didn't bring happiness. It brought pressure. Wedding plans were postponed indefinitely for his health. Conversations about the future became impossible because he might not have one. Everything existed in a suspended present, where she waited and waited for a crisis that never fully arrived. Her body began to suffer the consequences of living in constant tension. Headaches became normal. Fatigue settled into her bones. She fainted once in the kitchen, waking up on the floor with him standing over her, annoyed rather than concerned. He asked if she could still make dinner. She apologized for worrying him. That night, while she slept fitfully, he went out. Not to a hospital. Not to rest. He went to a bar, laughing loudly, drinking freely, telling friends how exhausting it was to play sick all the time. He joked about how easily sympathy could be turned into loyalty, how devotion was cheaper than therapy. Someone asked if he ever felt guilty. He shrugged. "She needs me," he said. "People like her need someone to suffer for." They laughed. None of them knew she would never hear those words, but her body would pay for them anyway. Her collapse came quietly. No dramatic scene, no final goodbye. Just a body that had been pushed too far, for too long, by love that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Stress wrapped itself around her heart, squeezing until it could no longer keep rhythm. She died alone, in the place she had given up everything to maintain. When he found her, panic flashed briefly across his face, not from grief, but from inconvenience. This wasn't part of the plan. He called for help, cried loudly when others arrived, performed the role of the devastated fiancé with the same skill he had performed illness. The world mourned her. They called her devoted, loyal, tragic. They said she died from loving too hard. He stood at her funeral dressed in black, tears falling on cue, accepting condolences with bowed head and shaking hands. No one questioned him. No one suspected the truth. He walked away untouched, carrying sympathy like a shield. He believed the lie had ended perfectly, with her buried and him free. What he didn't know was that death had not erased her. It had sharpened her. And somewhere beyond that quiet ending, she was opening her eyes, remembering everything. She woke up gasping, lungs dragging air as if she had been underwater for too long. Her hands flew to her chest, expecting pain, expecting the crushing finality of death, but there was none. Only the frantic rhythm of a living heart. The ceiling above her was familiar. Too familiar. The faint crack near the corner, the old fan humming unevenly, the pale morning light filtering through half-drawn curtains. Confusion hit first. Then terror. Then something far worse, recognition. She pushed herself upright, trembling, and her eyes landed on the calendar by the door. The date was wrong. No, not wrong. Earlier. Years earlier. The realization slammed into her with brutal force. She hadn't survived. She had returned. Memory did not come gently. It tore through her in waves, her exhaustion, her isolation, her collapse on the kitchen floor, the hollow quiet of dying alone. And then his face at the funeral. Those tears. That lie. Her hands clenched into the bedsheet until her knuckles turned white. Rebirth, she understood immediately, was not a gift meant for peace. It was a sentence. A second chance burdened with the full weight of knowing how everything ended. She lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, breathing through the storm of emotions crashing inside her. Fear. Rage. Grief. And beneath it all, a cold, steady clarity she had never possessed before. When she finally stood and looked in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. She was younger. Healthier. Unbroken. No dark circles carved by sleepless nights, no tension etched permanently into her posture. This version of her had not yet been consumed by love masquerading as sacrifice. But her eyes were different. They held the quiet horror of someone who had seen the end and come back carrying it. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Love without truth was not devotion. It was self-destruction. And she would not die for a lie again. The first time she saw him after rebirth, her stomach twisted, not with longing, but with revulsion so sharp it nearly made her dizzy. He smiled at her the same way he always had, warm and familiar, unaware that the woman in front of him knew every future move he would make. She noticed everything this time. The ease of his breathing, the strength in his posture, the way his eyes calculated reactions even while pretending vulnerability. When he spoke, she listened not for meaning, but for manipulation. Every word aligned perfectly with her memories. The script had not changed. Only she had. He told her about the diagnosis again, choosing the same timing, the same controlled trembling, the same carefully placed pauses. Cancer. Late stage. No guarantees. As he spoke, she felt something unexpected rise inside her. Not heartbreak, not fear, but an almost clinical fascination. She watched him perform as if he were an actor on a stage she could finally see. And when the silence fell, waiting for her to step into the role of savior, she surprised him by staying quiet a moment longer. Long enough for uncertainty to flicker across his face. She agreed to stay. Not because she believed him, but because she needed proof. This time, she would not accuse blindly. She would not confront emotionally. She would observe, collect, confirm. She played the devoted partner again, but now it was an act layered over experience. She suggested doctor visits and watched how he deflected. She asked for reports and noted how he changed the subject. She paid attention to dates, names, contradictions. Every lie stacked neatly in her mind like evidence waiting for trial. And while he believed he was tightening his grip, she was measuring the distance between them, planning how to step away without falling. At night, when he slept beside her, she didn't watch his chest in fear anymore. She watched it with certainty. Strong. Steady. Alive. She remembered how she had once believed this breathing was borrowed time. The thought made her jaw tighten. She realized how carefully he had studied her empathy, how expertly he had turned her kindness into leverage. He hadn't chosen her randomly. He had chosen her because she believed love meant endurance, because she confused suffering with loyalty. That truth hurt more than the lie about cancer ever had. The fear of death no longer ruled her. She had already died. That knowledge changed everything. She began quietly reclaiming pieces of herself, reaching out to friends she had once pushed away, pursuing opportunities she had once abandoned. She didn't explain. She didn't justify. She simply stopped shrinking. He noticed the change, of course. He asked if she was tired, if she was pulling away, if she still loved him. She answered calmly, reassuring him just enough to keep him complacent. He mistook her emotional distance for burnout. He had no idea it was strategy. With each passing day, her grief transformed. The sadness sharpened into resolve. The anger cooled into patience. Revenge, she learned, was not loud. It was precise. She didn't want him to suffer blindly. She wanted him to understand, to feel exposed, to lose the control he cherished so deeply. She began saving messages, recording conversations, documenting timelines. Every joke he made about being too sick to do something strenuous, every night he went out partying while claiming exhaustion, she archived it all. This time, the truth would not disappear with her body. Sometimes, she wondered what kind of woman she would have been if she had never died. Softer. Kinder. Easier to manipulate. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that love should not demand annihilation. Someone who knew that surviving a lie once meant never being fooled by it again. Rebirth hadn't erased her love for who she once was. It honored her by refusing to repeat her fate. He still believed he was in control. He still believed the lie was working. He still believed she was his. What he didn't know was that she was already preparing to end the story. She did not rush revenge. That was the first and most important difference between the woman she had been and the woman she had become. Before, emotion ruled her decisions. Now, restraint did. She understood that truth revealed at the wrong time could still be dismissed, twisted, or buried. So she waited. She let him grow comfortable again. She let him believe her quietness was surrender, her calmness acceptance. Men like him mistook patience for weakness. And she used that mistake to build his downfall piece by piece. She began by widening the circle. Slowly, carefully, she reconnected him with people he had once kept distant. Friends, relatives, colleagues. She encouraged gatherings, dinners, casual meetings, always framed as making memories, while there was still time. He liked that narrative. It fed his performance. He played the tragic figure beautifully, accepting sympathy, telling half-stories about treatments and fatigue. But now there was a difference. She watched who asked questions. She noticed who grew confused by inconsistencies. She planted small, harmless-seeming details that contradicted his earlier lies, never enough to expose him outright, just enough to create discomfort. Doubt is more powerful when it grows naturally. She insisted on attending appointments again. Not aggressively, just lovingly persistent. When he postponed, she suggested second opinions. When he changed doctors, she asked for contact information in case of emergencies. Each request was reasonable. Each refusal he made stacked another brick in the wall she was building around him. She documented everything. Dates he claimed to be hospitalized while his location showed bars and parties. Messages where he joked about being miraculously fine today. Photos where his body told a different story than his mouth. She didn't confront him. She smiled, nodded, supported. She let him lie himself into a corner with no exits. Then she chose the moment. A gathering large enough that denial would be impossible, but intimate enough that the truth would feel personal. A family dinner. People he needed respect from. People whose opinions mattered. He arrived late, as always, leaning slightly on her arm, playing fragile. She watched him perform with a strange calm, almost detached. When the conversation turned, as it inevitably did, to his health, she spoke gently. She asked simple questions. Names. Dates. Treatments. The room grew quiet as his answers shifted, hesitated, contradicted themselves. She didn't accuse. She let silence interrogate him. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady. She laid out facts, not emotions. Appointment records that didn't exist. Doctors who had never treated him. Messages saved over months. Photos time-stamped against his claims. Each piece landed like a weight dropped into still water. No shouting. No hysteria. Just truth, clean and undeniable. Faces changed around the table, confusion turning to shock, shock curdling into anger. He tried to laugh it off, tried to spin, tried to cry. But lies collapse differently than truth. They don't fight back well when exposed to light. The room erupted, but she stayed still. She watched as sympathy drained from him in real time. She watched disbelief turn into disgust. Questions he had avoided for years came fast and merciless. Why would you lie about something like this? How long? How could you do this to her? He looked at her then, not with love, not even with anger, but with fear. For the first time, he understood he had lost control. Not just of the story, but of how people saw him. Reputation, the very tool he had used to cage her, now became the blade cutting him free from protection. The fallout was swift and brutal. Engagement ended publicly. Support vanished overnight. Friends distanced themselves. Family members demanded explanations he couldn't provide without admitting cruelty. The man who once fed on sympathy now found himself starved of it. Whispers followed him everywhere. The story spread, not exaggerated, not dramatized, just factual enough to ruin him completely. People didn't need embellishment. The truth was ugly enough on its own. She didn't gloat. She didn't stay to watch him break. That wasn't the revenge she wanted. Her victory was not in his suffering, it was in her freedom. She walked away calmly, her steps light in a way they had never been before. For the first time, she was not carrying someone else's weight. She was not apologizing for existing. She was not mistaking pain for love. Behind her, his life unraveled. In front of her, something unfamiliar waited. Not justice, not closure, but choice. She expected to feel something dramatic when it was over. Triumph, satisfaction, maybe even cruelty sharpened into pleasure. That was how revenge was written in stories. Loud, explosive, final. But as days passed and silence replaced chaos, what she felt instead was unfamiliar calm. The kind that comes after a storm not because the damage was small, but because it was finished. His name stopped appearing on her phone. His shadow stopped following her into rooms. For the first time across 2 lifetimes, Her thoughts belonged entirely to her. He tried to reach out, of course. At first with apologies carefully worded to sound remorseful without admitting intent. Then with anger, accusing her of destroying him, of exaggerating, of misunderstanding. Finally, with desperation. Messages long and incoherent, swinging between love and blame, fear and entitlement. She read none of them. Blocking him was not an act of revenge, it was an act of self-respect. In her previous life, she would have engaged, explained, tried to soften the fallout. This time, she understood something crucial. People who weaponize lies do not deserve closure. They deserve consequences. The world adjusted quickly without her carrying his story. She took the job she had once declined, moved to a space that felt like her own, rebuilt friendships she had abandoned in the name of devotion. People noticed the change in her, not as a miracle, but as growth. She laughed differently now. She rested without guilt. She spoke without measuring how her words might affect someone else's comfort. Love, she learned, should not feel like a slow erasure. It should not demand you disappear to prove you care. Sometimes she thought about the man she had loved, or rather, the version of him she had believed in. She allowed herself to mourn that illusion honestly. Not because it was real, but because it had shaped her once. Forgiveness crossed her mind, but she didn't rush it. Forgiveness, she realized, was not about excusing harm. It was about releasing yourself from carrying it. And she would do that in her own time, not on anyone else's schedule. As for him, the damage was permanent in ways no confrontation could have achieved. He didn't just lose her. He lost credibility, trust, the ability to perform victimhood without suspicion. Every future relationship carried the stain of what he had done. People remembered. They always do when the lie is that cruel. He learned, too late, that some manipulations cost more than they give. That some victims do not stay buried. That exposure does not need violence to be devastating. On quiet evenings, when she sat alone with a cup of tea and the window open, she sometimes thought about death, not with fear, but with understanding. She had died once believing love required self-destruction. She lived now knowing love begins with truth. Rebirth hadn't made her cruel. It had made her precise. It hadn't taught her how to hate. It had taught her how to choose herself. Her revenge was not brutal because it was bloody or dramatic. It was brutal because it was irreversible. Because it left him exactly where he belonged. Without her, without lies, without power. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, she was free.